My name is Gordon Jennings, and I will be your guide throughout this video, NES Repair Secrets by Irata Systems, Mesa, Arizona. Through the course of this video, we will instruct you how to repair, how to troubleshoot, how to recognize symptoms for the NES system, the controller, the control deck, the main board, and some other commonly occurring problems on selling these videos. So what I ask from you is that you obey my copyright on this video and don't make any copies. If your friends or acquaintances would like a copy of the video, please refer them to Irata Systems, Mesa, Arizona. NES system reached a popularity in America that no other video game system has reached to this date. I began repairing video games clear back in the early 80s with the Atari. In the later 70s and the early 80s with the Ataris. Even Atari did not reach the popularity that the Nintendo Entertainment System has reached. There are probably 4 or 5 million of these in existence in the United States. Eventually, every single one of them will break. And I am here to show you how to repair those. I will take you step by step through the system, beginning with... One thing I'd like you to notice, this is not a fancy video. It doesn't have a lot of graphics. I don't have a lot of subtitles. I don't have fade-ins. I don't have fade-outs. I'm doing this at my workbench here. It's very simple and straightforward. The purpose of this video is not to wow you with great graphics and great subtitles and fade-ins and great special effects. That's not the purpose of this video. The purpose of this video is to instruct you on how to repair this. So that's my main purpose, and we will do that through the course of this video. Alright, let's talk about the NES control deck. Probably many of you are waiting just to hear about this, so I'll get to it. First thing you want to look for is any physical damage that has occurred to it. Scan around, see if there's any chips or anything, any cracks. If there is, you want to make note of that and give it back to them in the condition that you received it. Cleaned up a little, obviously. Some of the doors are broken off. That's alright. If a door is broken off, it's just a dust cover and doesn't affect the play at all. So just make a note of the condition that it's in. The first thing you want to do when you get a system in is remove all cartridges and plug the unit in the back, with not hooked up to the TV or anything. Without a cartridge into it, turn the unit on. And what you should get is a flashing light. There's power to it, and with the flashing light like that, that is the symptom that I mentioned earlier on the cartridge. It doesn't see that the cartridge is there, so it keeps resetting itself. Okay? That means, what that will tell us, that tells us that the AC transformer is good. And then it's not the AC transformer. If you don't get a flashing light, then there's something wrong with the integral power circuit. So, first thing you'll want to do is remove the connector. Get your voltmeter that you have, turn it on, turn it to voltage, and you want to check to see, this is an AC adapter and it puts out AC voltage. So your voltmeter needs to be on AC volts. You should get somewhere around 15 or so volts. I'm sorry, 10 or so volts. Plug it in, insert one lead into the center and one lead here, and you should read a consistent of about 10 volts. It may fluctuate a couple volts depending on the manufacturer, the subcontractor that made it for Nintendo. So this tells me that the AC transformer is good. If the AC transformer is good, then the problem is somewhere else in the unit. Turn it on. Again, you should get a flashing light. So I know that the power is good. Next thing you'll want to do is turn on a television turn it to whichever channel that you need to. Now back here is a 3/4 channel 3/4 switch. Next thing you should do, as I mentioned, is hook it up to a television. There's a 3/4 switch here, so depending on your metropolitan area, if you have a channel 3 or a channel 4 that's broadcast, you should switch it to the other channel. In my area there is a channel 3, so I use channel 4. Make sure that you have that switch set correctly. So switch it to 4 or to 3. I have as I mentioned, I have mine set on 4. Plug it in and get a game that you know is good. In this case, Breakthrough. Turn it on and see what you get. Now, one of the symptoms that most people get is a flashing screen. It'll just flash even with the cartridge in, and it won't play even with the game in. It appears the same as if the game is not in, and in reality what's occurring is that the connector is been pulled back and the contacts are not being made properly, and it actually thinks that there is no cartridge inside. I'll show you how to fix that in a few minutes. The other symptom that people will complain about is that their screen is snowy. Now, when you insert the cartridge and you turn it on, you should get a very clear, strong signal. In other words, notice the snow on your TV. When you're on channel 3 or channel 4, whichever one you're on, there should be snow. As soon as you hit the power on, you should immediately get a screen. Even if it's black, even if it's blank, even with no cartridge in it, what will happen is it should go completely blank with no snow at all. If it's snowy at all, and by turning this on and off, if you don't see an abrupt change in the TV screen, then there's something wrong inside with your RF switch, and we've already been through how to fix that, or with the connector, the RF modulator connector, which we'll cover that in just a moment. All right, we're going to cover some things right now that I think are important. So what I'll do is, first of all, we'll start off by the proper way to disassemble a NES system. First of all, make sure that all the power is disconnected. Power and the coax to the RCA plug. The next thing you want to do is flip it over. One nice thing to have is a cordless screwdriver. I prefer the elongated, the linear kind, because it's easier for me to handle. This one pushes and makes into a handle type, but I don't like that as well. It's according to your preference. But these make it very, very easy for you to disassemble these very rapidly. There's 6 screws on the bottom, as you can see. With a power screwdriver, it comes apart very quickly. With experience, you'll be able to tell when the screw is out of its hole and when it's just spinning at the top of the hole. Okay, so what I usually do is I loosen all the screws and I take it out, leaving the lid in this position. Then I turn it at an angle and I hold it like this so that the 3 bottom screws fall out into the lid, and I can catch the three top screws with my hands. Now that the 3 top screws, sometimes they don't come out and you have to push them out. The 3 top screws and the 3 other screws are out, I can take the lid off, and what I've done is I've labeled a small, this is just a butter margarine plastic dish. I've labeled it small because most of the screws in the Nintendo are the same size. There are 2 screws out of all the 20 or so that we're going to take out that are different. but all of these are the same. So I put those into a small little bin called small. Now at this point what I do is I usually evaluate the lid to see how dirty it is. At the beginning of each day I get a bucket of water, just put some dishwashing soap in it, warm water, and I draw that. Now what I'll do is while I'm working on this, I'll drop this in the warm water and let it soak. There's nothing that can be hurt by water or soap. And while this is soaking, if there's any goo or gunk on this, it'll loosen up and you'll be able to scrub it off and clean it up so it'll look real nice. Sometimes there's stickers on here too. You can pull the stickers off if there's any residual adhesive. What works nice on removing that is WD-40. Spray it with WD-40, work it in with your finger, let it sit for a few minutes, and then it'll usually wipe off with either a Kleenex or a paper towel or something. Okay? So I'm going to take this and set it in the bucket of water. I mentioned earlier what I like to do is get a bucket, just a gallon bucket of warm water, put in some dishwashing fluid. In this case it's just Kingston liquid dish detergent, and the lid will fit in just right inside this bucket. I usually fill it up enough that I can still get in there and work, but I have enough warm water to cover this ribbed part. This is the usual part that gets real dirty. Okay? And I keep a brush close by, and when this has had a chance to soak, I use the brush to go back and forth, get inside the ribs to clean it. I can do the sides with it real quickly, so that now the lid is clean. I then rinse it off with clean water, and you may want to. This may take a little while for you to clean, depending on how dirty they are. So this is just a little nice little add-on I do for each one that I repair. Then I set the lid, I let it set for a few minutes down on the floor. I put it down on the floor and let it set while I'm working on it to dry off. Okay? So we'll set that down there and we'll come back to it in just a few minutes. Okay, now we're going to get to the guts of the NES control deck. We've already removed the 6 screws from the lid, put them in here. Now there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 screws to remove the RF shield. Sometimes there's an 8th screw in this lower right hand corner, but most of them only have 7. So again, remove all 7. Placing them in the little dish. Okay, now once those 7 are finished, or removed, you can remove the top RF shield. All it is a piece of metal that's been bent around to fit down on top. And this shields any radio frequency interference that might be given off by the Nintendo that would interfere with your television. So what we'll do is we'll set that aside. Sometimes that's real dirty too, and that has lint or dirt or something on it. You can just brush it off, brush the lint off the top of that with a rag, and then I set that aside for later. Now what we've done is we've exposed the insides of the Nintendo. You'll notice that right here, this is the game loading cartridge. I want to make a point right here. The way that the Nintendo works, you have a 72-pin connector that's deep down inside the Nintendo. As you insert the game into it, and as you push the game down, the game goes into the connector, and then as it pushes down, it levers. There's a lever action there on the connectors. Okay? Now the door, as you know sits right here, and that shields it from any dust getting in. But if the door is not there, you'll get dust in this part of the Nintendo, which is sometimes bad. However, the connector is recessed far enough that you don't get a lot of dust or dirt that floats down in there. Most of it is introduced by the contacts, via the contacts. The cartridge will sit out for a while, dust will settle on the contacts, and then it's inserted and the dust will transfer from the cartridge into the contacts. So that's why the little dust cover that Nintendo gives you is important to use, and to keep these in a clean spot. Now at this point, you can take, if you just suspect that the connector is dirty, you can take one of the cleaners that I've sent to you and insert it and just move it in and out, and back and forth, in a back and forth action. And what that does is that cleans the contacts. It will clean off any dirt that's on the contacts or remove any hair. Okay? Now, one of the biggest problems that I mentioned earlier is the flashing screen. About 90%, 91% of all the Nintendos I've gotten in have the same singular problem. And that is that the 72-pin game connector that hooks onto the motherboard is usually dirty or worn out, in most cases worn out, and needs to be rebuilt or replaced. You can replace them. Again, the address of where you can buy these for replacement is included in the documentation. However, at the time of the making of this video, the price was around $20 to $25 depending on the volume that you buy. So what I've done is I've invented a technique to rebuild these. And the technique, you can take any cartridge, any 72-pin connector, any 72-pin connector, and rebuild it stronger and better than the original. So I will show you that technique in just a few minutes. To finish removing and disassembling it, there's 2 screws on either side of the RF modulator that must be removed. Again, what I keep on hand is a little picking tool, and it's easy now to reach in and pull those screws out. Again, these are the same size as all the other screws. We've removed 13 so far. That's the 14th, and now this is the 15th screw, and they all are the same size. I put them all in the small bin. Now these 2 front screws that hold in the loading cartridge are again the same size, so they'll go in the same bin. Remove those, put those in there. And the very back 2 screws, the very back ones, this one on the right and this one on the left, are also the same size. Now, the only other 2 screws that you'll have to worry about are those, the screw here and the screw over here, the middle ones. And those 2 screws are not the same length as these. So I have another little bin here that I have appropriately labeled long, and what I do is when I pull those 2 out, sometimes they're the same color, but usually they're a silver color versus a copper color. I will put those in this other bin to keep them separate from the others. Now that that's been done, I can stack these and move them to the side. The entire insides will just lift right out. And again, you'll have to experiment with that to get used to lifting it in and out, to moving it around. Once you lift it out, this is the kind of tricky part. It's connected by three connectors. The leftmost game controller, this is the game controller, hooks to the front connector. And it hooks with the purple onto the left and the brown on the right. Okay, so the way you get those out is you just pull on it. I haven't found a better way to get those out other than just pulling on it. Now there's a sharp edge right here, so I kind of rock it back and forth as I pull, and that comes out. Now that's the on-off switch reset connector, and that ties in over here. Okay? And then the right game controller plugs in just right next to the game control, or to the on-off switch reset switch. And again, I rock it back and forth as I pull it. Now this is free to move around, and the bottom you'll notice, is comprised of a couple things. There's a bottom here, and this plate comes off. And a lot of people ask me, why is that plate there? Well, it turns out Nintendo, the authorized center up in Washington, has a computer, and the computer, they pop this off and they break this little cover off and take it off. Their computer plugs directly into the motherboard, and they can troubleshoot a motherboard in just microseconds. Whether the RAM's bad, the CPU, any of the chips on there, they can tell it right away. Unfortunately, we're not that sophisticated, nor do we have that money to invest. Therefore, we won't worry about that. However, there is the assembly here for the reset power, which comes out also. Only remove these if the bottom is dirty and needs to be washed. Take these off. You take these off by taking these two screws off, these two screws out. This, I'll go ahead and do that for you. Take these small two screws out, and I usually just put them in the same bin with the long screw. Okay? Now this cover hinges from the bottom and pulls off the top because there's two little levers here that have to fit down. Okay, like that. So pull that off. Now, there's a left and a right one, and you'll notice that they're not the same length. If you hold them side by side and stretch them out, one is longer than the other. Okay? They're interchangeably, electrically, there's no difference. The only difference is that one is a little longer than the other. Okay? So be sure to put those in right. It won't hurt if you get them mixed up, and they'll reach to either side, but the short one goes on the left and the long one goes on the right. Now you'll recognize this from our earlier troubleshooting of the controller. This is what I use to troubleshoot the controller. I have a couple of junk units that I've been able to take parts off of, so I keep this handy, and I use that to help troubleshoot the controller with. Whether you have the resources to do that or not, it's up to you, but I went ahead and got one unit that was pretty well trashed, and I used that to troubleshoot with. So I'm going to put these back in real quick. Okay, cover goes back on by hinging the top, going to the bottom, replacing the two screws. Sometimes those are dirty enough that they need to be washed. They need to be washed off. Okay, so screw that back on. And screw the other back on. Okay, there we go. Now, the way that the power and reset comes out is there's a screw here and a screw here, and they just kind of lift out. You have to kind of tilt it and lift as you pull it out. And these get pretty dirty sometimes. Be careful when you wash them off not to get a lot of water in the switch itself. What I usually do is I take it apart. I have one over here that I use for troubleshooting that I've taken out of another one, the same one that I got that controller socket out of. And what I usually do is I just pretend this was water. I dip it in about like that and then just wash it off with a towel, paper towel or something, toothbrush. Get that all clean and avoid getting water up inside these. It's just not a good idea. Okay? So now that that bottom is out, I usually set that aside for later assembly. I leave it like that. Again, if it needs to be cleaned, remove all these and you can immerse it in the same water that you wash the top with and clean the top and the bottom. These stickers are metallized stickers and they won't come off even if they get wet, unlike some others that are paperized. So don't worry about these stickers coming off. Take note of the serial number on the bottom. Okay, so I'm going to set that down. So what that leaves us with is the RF shield for the bottom, and now this just lifts right off. It's a little tricky getting it back on again because you have to make sure that this bottom connector is inside the opening. So it slides on, again pulls off. Again, I'll set this to the side and we'll use that later. Now, the cartridge assembly slides forward and off. Okay? You'll notice that once you put it back on, you need to be careful that this little lip is properly seated right. If it's not over the motherboard, if it's like this, then you won't get it correct, and when you screw it down it'll cause this to bend and this won't index properly. Okay? These things, when you push down, it should hold down, and then when you let go it should push down again, it should come up. And sometimes I've had to work on the mechanism in here to fix them. You'll have to kind of experiment with that and find out what's the best for you on repairing those. But usually these can be immersed in water if they're dirty and cleaned up. Again, with a toothbrush or something to that effect. Set that aside. Okay, so what that leaves us with now is the main circuit board, okay, and the 72-pin connector. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull the 72-pin connector off. Now note that the 72-pin connector goes on the solder side, not this side. And it's easy. It will go on this way, but it won't work. Okay? So when you need to, put it on this side. When you need to put it back. Now, it is okay at this point to go ahead and insert a cartridge for test purposes. However, that's why you need this on-off switch. Hook it over here, like this. And if you're going to play a game, you'll need a controller, one of those controller things to hook on. Then hook the coax cable here and the power cable here, and you should be able to turn it on and get a solid red light, meaning that it's making proper connection here. Turn on your television and see that everything works fine. If it doesn't work fine, then usually there's something associated, obviously, with what's left. Okay, at this point there are three major problems that occur with, if a problem exists, there are three major problems that will probably solve 95% of all your troubles. Again, to this point we've troubleshot the AC adapter, the RF switch, and the controller units, and the game. So we know that it's not there, so we know that it's in here, right? So what you want to do is turn it on, and if it still flashes at this point, the biggest problem you'll encounter is the 72-pin connector. The 72-pin connector, what happens is these contacts, the contacts in here, get dirty or they oxidize, but the biggest problem that occurs is they recede. They lose their spring and they move back away from the circuit board. There are circuit boards that you'll get in, or units that you'll get in, that no matter how good you clean them, you'll never, ever, ever get them to work. So you have to either get a new one or rebuild them, and I'll go through the rebuilding process in just a moment. To clean them, first of all, as I showed you before, just insert the little wand and move it up and down and back and forth. The top portion you have to be very careful of, because you can grab one of these, grab the side of one of the fingers and bend it if you're too aggressive. The bottom part, though, you don't have to worry about it. What I usually do is I just insert it and move it back and forth. I insert it at an angle so that the point is in, and that gives me, going this direction, an edge, and going back this direction, an edge to move smoothly across. So I clean the bottom portion of the connector with one of these cleaning wands, and you can see by the dirt on this one how dirty this one was. Now the top one, you usually can look at it and tell if there's any oxidation. It usually shows up in the way of a green little corrosion on some of the contacts. If there's a lot of that, you may want to get something like a straight jeweler's screwdriver and move it back and forth and scrape that off. Okay? The next thing you want to do is rebuild the top portion of this connector. And I will show you in just a moment. I'll zoom in and we'll do a step-by-step. I'll take you through how to rebuild one of these connectors. And that's where you're really going to make your money. Without having to pay the $24 for a new one of these. This incidentally is a patented item. Nintendo has a patent on this. So I've tried sourcing this out of Korea, out of Taiwan, out of China, out of Japan. You can't get it anywhere. All my suppliers come back and tell me that this is a patented item. So you can't get that. So the choice is you either have to go to Nintendo and pay the exorbitant price of $20 for this thing, $25, or get it on the black market somehow and pay a portion of that, which some of you are doing now, or you can rebuild it. And the rebuilding takes some time. Once you get good at it, you can rebuild one in maybe 10 minutes, about 10 minutes it takes. So I'm going to set that aside and we'll rebuild one here in just a moment. The other two major problems that you'll encounter are, remember when I showed you when you turn this on, if the screen doesn't definitely change from a snowy to a real strong solid TV screen, then usually you've got a problem in the somewhere in the RF portion of your control box, your RF modulator here. If you've checked out and made sure that the cable is okay, then the next most common failure occurs in the RF modulator itself. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take off the bottom cover of the RF modulator. If you look in here, right at this point there is a wire that is soldered from that spot that must go up and turn at an angle and be connected to the very center of this RCA jack. What happens is over a period of time, the mechanical connection on the outside of this barrel of this RCA comes loose. It's allowed to spin. Okay? So when your customer inserts and pulls out the RCA plug, this is allowed to move around because the mechanical connection has been degraded sometimes. Other times it's just been built too small inside. So when this is inserted inside, what it does is it actually hits that wire and pushes it and breaks it. So the wire, if you looked inside, the RCA plug is here and the wire is like this, and sometimes you can move it around and get the two to touch, but there's physically been a break in that wire. So the first operation is to go in and repair that wire, and that'll reset. Another way of telling is the red and the yellow jacks on the side of the RF modulator are composite video and composite audio out. You can take a patch cord, plug it into here, plug it into any VCR that has a composite video and audio input. It'll say in audio, in video. Get the patch cord, plug it right into your VCR, turn on your TV, set your VCR from tuner to direct input, and now you can turn on the Nintendo and you'll be able to play your game through your VCR. So the composite video and composite audio is now feeding through your VCR. And that's a good way to troubleshoot and tell whether that wire is broke or not. But chances are, if it's a fuzzy picture or if it doesn't give you a strong clearing of the television band when you turn it on, that wire is broken. So first thing you need to do is check to see if the barrel is loose. If the barrel is loose, you need to get your soldering iron and very carefully and quickly tack maybe 1, 2, or 3 little solders around the outside of this barrel, and do it very quickly so that you don't melt the plastic here. Very quickly, I mean, I'll show you how to do it. I'll move the camera up here in a minute and I'll show you how to do that. Now the next thing is once that's secured, and in this case it is secured, there's no movement of the barrel connector. So what you need to do is, the next thing you need to do, and the proper way of doing this, is to take the RF modulator completely off. This is a board, as you can see, that has the RF modulator removed from it. That's the optimum way of doing it, because then you can take the lid off, the other side lid, like we took this one off, you can take the lid off of this side without any problem. The problem with that is it's a pain in the neck to get in there and unsolder these. If you'll notice on this motherboard there are 5 connections, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, in addition to the ground connections here. So there's 3 ground connections that you must hook up and 5 printed circuit board connections. The 5 printed circuit board connections are plate throughs. They go all the way through into the other side. And this is where it's real important, right here, that the connection be made. Unfortunately, that's not where you do the soldering. If the plate through is destroyed, it's very, very difficult to reattach the RF modulator. You can't sit here on this side of the board with your soldering iron and apply enough heat to get the solder to melt through and make a contact on this side of the printed circuit board. It's very difficult. So I avoid that in any way I can. I avoid pulling the RF modulator off. I've pulled out too many of these plate throughs. Doesn't work. Not a good way of doing it, in my opinion. So what do? Well, for me, the next best thing to do is to bend this plate back. So take the front completely off, and then what I try to do is bend it as far back as I can get it to bend. So I bend it like this, okay? Now I'm going to stop the camera at this point, move it forward, and I'm going to show you what the RF modulator looks like. This is a close-up of the RF modulator with the top pulled up. I'm going to try to get it up here close, and I'm going to have to adjust the macro lens here. But you see that I've bent the lid up so that it exposes the insides of the RF modulator. And you'll notice that right inside here, you'll see the little wire. Get it up here close where you can see it. You'll see the wire that is soldered from the insides of that RCA jack. The little white wire there jumps from that solder joint down to the printed circuit board underneath. Remember, we took the cover off a few minutes ago. I put it back on here for you, but so it goes from this solder joint right here. That little wire comes around and has to hook on right there. Okay, right there. And usually what happens is because this spins, or this was soldered too close up here, it breaks. And all you have to do is get a new wire and replace that one, or take that one, strip it back a little ways, and pull it up and resolder it right there. Then you can test it again. But make sure that this is not still spinning, or you'll have the same symptom within just a few months. Okay, that's it right there. Okay, so now we put the cover back on the bottom of the RF modulator, snap it back on, and we bend this back down again. Sometimes you'll have to insert a little toothpick or something in there to get it to lever to bend down properly. But you bend down, and usually it'll close back up again. And you can now test it in this mode. Again, attaching your on-off switch to the side. You'll need to attach the on-off switch to the side. Power, coax cable. Hook up your connector. Insert your Urban Champ cartridge, whatever it is, and then turn it on. Okay, now the next, the number 2 problem that you can fix is what's wrong with all of these motherboards right here. If you look at the unit, the front of the unit, the NES board, there is, this is called the CPU board, and there's various rev levels, revisions. I assume there's 1. I haven't seen a 1. I've seen a 3 and a 4, all the way up to 10 or 11 now. This happens to be a 7. Regardless of that, they all have the same chips located in the same location. These 2 chips are called SRAM chips. This chip here services the PPU, or the picture processing unit, which is this chip here. You'll notice that this chip is removed. I have taken the chip out and put a 40-pin IC connector in its place. This is the CPU, and the SRAM here services the CPU. Okay? So the CPU, the SRAM, PPU. Alright? The most common problem is the PPU will go bad. And when you turn it on, you'll get a garbage character. You'll get a logical progression, or at this point, you'll get a garbage screen. Now, a garbage screen can also be caused by a bad connector. So you have to make sure that you have a good connector and a good game on. Once you're sure that that's there, it'll show up as a bad screen. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put one in that has a bad PPU in it so you can see what it looks like. Alright, this particular motherboard has a bad PPU in it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to attach the 72-pin connector to it. I have a game that I've removed from the cartridge that makes it a little easier to work with that I insert. Now I can add on the on-off switch. I can add on the coax cable and the power cord. Turning it on, this is called Bayou Billy. Okay, now let me get you a game that most people are familiar with, and that's Duck Hunt Mario Brothers. Pull that one out, put this one in. Okay, now you'll notice that the screen appears to be somewhat normal. There is a line running through the back of Mario, and there's lines that appear throughout the screen. If you go ahead and played this game, if I attached a joystick here and went ahead and played this game, the game would play, but there would always be, the screen wouldn't look correct. Now you can get the same symptom, as I mentioned, with a bad connector. So you have to make sure that you get a good clean connector in there. Once you've got a good clean connector in there and a good game, and it still shows up as the symptom, chances are you've got a bad CPU or a bad PPU, picture processing unit, and that's the chip that's on the motherboard. It will also show up as just a blank screen. The screen will come on, it won't flash, it'll be solid, but it'll be just one color. Or in this case we have a black and white TV, so you cannot see the colors, but it'll just be a single color like red or blue or green, and it'll stay there. That also, chances are, it's a bad PPU. So what do you do in that case? Well, let me get a motherboard over here that I can work with. As I mentioned earlier, this is a CPU. It's Nintendo's part RP2A03G. This is the PPU, and that's Nintendo part RP2C02G. So this is 3G and this is a 2G. They are a member of the 6500 CPU family. Unsolder, using the method I showed you for taking out the 4021 chip in this controller, unsolder the bad PPU, replace it with a socket. I always recommend you replace it with a socket. That way if you put it in and you burn it up as you put it in, you don't double your work. You can pop it out, and it also you can't ruin an IC socket by overheating it most of the time. So I socket these, and then I'll put a PPU chip in its place. Okay, so that's the second problem that occurs with the motherboard that you can fix. Now, I wanted to mention earlier that this little chip right here, it's got a label on it, the 3193A. It's called the CIC chip. Now you'll note that chip, that CIC chip, is the exact same CIC chip found on the game cartridge. That chip and this chip work hand in hand. Here's what occurs. The motherboard generates a 4 megahertz cycle, 4 megahertz, 4 million cycles per second signal. It pulses it into the CIC chip on the motherboard. The CIC chip on the motherboard sends it out directly into this, the CIC chip on the game cartridge. The CIC chip on the game cartridge then does something with the signal. I think what it does is divides by 100 and pulses, does a one-shot every 100 cycles. It then sends that signal back out, its pins, to this one. And pin 7 is hooked up to pin 7, I believe, of this chip. If any of those signals aren't there, this chip, the CIC chip, is tied into the reset circuitry of your motherboard. So what occurs if you get a cartridge and it's an unauthorized cartridge without the CIC chip on it, what will occur is you'll get a blinking screen every so many pulses, the Nintendo will reset itself. So you hit the reset button. That's one way of resetting the system. That's a manual reset. But Nintendo also put in a secret circuitry that will reset automatically if that chip is not present on the game cartridge. Now there's a way around that. The way around that is if you desolder this chip and remove it completely take that chip out or cut it out and pull it out, the Nintendo will still operate properly. You'll still be able to put a cartridge in and it will still operate properly. However, you won't be able to reset it. You won't be able to hit this reset button and reset it. You can turn it off, turn it back on to start the game over again, but you cannot hit reset with this chip removed and have it start all over again. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set this unit up, and I've got this special cartridge here where the CIC chip is there, and I'm going to pop the CIC chip out and show you what occurs without the CIC chip in it. Alright, I have this unit set up. It's a good motherboard. Everything's fine on the motherboard, but I've got Bayou Billy, the game Bayou Billy, loaded in here, and you'll notice that it's operating fine. The light stays on constant and everything's fine. Now I'm going to turn the power off, and all I'm going to do is I've socketed the CIC chip. I'm going to pull off the CIC chip, okay, and now I'm going to turn it back on again. And Bayou Billy comes on, but every so many cycles of the clock, because that special Nintendo chip is not on the game cartridge, it senses that it's not there and it resets every so many cycles. So that's what you'll get. Okay? So we turn it off, and I'm going to put the chip back on again. Turn it back on again, and you'll notice that everything's fine. So that's the symptom that you'll get if you try to use an unauthorized cartridge